Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call to order the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals regular meeting for January 31st, 2018. The first item on our agenda is a consideration of the minutes from our last regular meeting from December 18th, 2017, where those minutes were provided to the members of the board. Are there any changes necessary to those?
Not for me.
If not, those will stand as approved as presented, and next we'll move to new business. The first is a variance request. It's application Z18001 by Nicholas Tarola, requesting 3 variances from the zoning ordinance to construct a medical office building, and this will be located at 1216 North Maple Street in a commercial fringe zoning district. There are 3 components to this application. The first is a variance of 19 feet from the required front yard setback of 42 feet along West McKnight Drive. The second is a variance of 13 feet from the required front yard setback of 42 feet along North Maple Street. And the last is a variance of 10 feet from the required side yard setback of 25 feet. Ms. Rush, if you'd review that for us.
Yes, thank you. Our applicant, Mr. Nicholas Tarola, is seeking 3 variances, as you stated, from the City of Murfreesboro Zoning Ordinance Chart 2 in order to construct a medical office building. Will also include on-site parking and a trash enclosure. Currently, the property is developed with a single-family residence and also a dance studio, which also has on-site parking. The applicant will be demolishing the existing structures and the parking lot and will retain the property line fences at this time. The property is located at 1216 North Maple Street and is zoned commercial fringe and has approximately 18,300 square feet in size for the parcel. Due to the parcel having 2 street frontages and so close to the intersection at McKnight, that this is a really difficult property to develop with this CF zoning district. The other properties in the vicinity that are also zoned commercial have much larger lot areas and sufficient adequate access. This one is kind of constrained. It almost serves as a buffer between the residences and the commercial that's adjoining it. As indicated, the requested variances are a 19-foot variance along the West McKnight Drive side from the required 42 feet, and this would allow the building no closer than 23 feet from the front property line. Second variance requested is 13-foot variance from the required front yard setback of 42 feet along the North Maple Street, which will allow the building no closer than 29 feet from the front property line. And then the third variance requested is a 10-foot variance from the required side yard setback of 25 feet. And just to give some context, the existing structure is located 11 feet from the West McKnight Drive Street, as shown on the figure that's on our screen now, and is 31 feet from the North Maple Street property line. So with the proposed structure, this would then kind of pretty much line up where less close to McKnight than what the current structure is. It would be further back and more alignment with the other residences. So it'll provide more of a continuum of the street kind of line of where the structures are. Planning staff did receive written comments from an adjacent neighbor asking that the existing privacy fence be retained, or if it is to be removed, that it be replaced with also a privacy fence of either a solid wood material or some other solid material to provide that buffering and screening between the 2 uses. And lastly, the city traffic engineer had reviewed the plans and recommends to the applicant to confirm that there is adequate right-of-way and that the existing 4-foot grass strip and 10-foot wide sidewalk be extended along the West McKnight Drive side. So with those pieces of information, the city staff, we do recommend that the wood privacy fence, if replaced, that the applicant be required to replace it with a similar or a privacy fence along the property lines. And then the second condition of approval that's recommended is that the applicant confirm that there is adequate right-of-way in order to extend that sidewalk and the curbing along West McKnight. Thank you very much.
Any questions for staff at this point? I had a question or two. The privacy fence, was that both the eastern property, which?
It runs along the east property line, and there's one that also runs along the south property line.
Okay.
And the plan was to leave those in place?
At this time, yes, I don't believe that they have not gone through the site plan review and approval process, which is where we have those issues addressed. So at this point, the applicant has indicated they will retain the fence, but if they do through the design process decide to remove the fence, that they will be replacing it with a privacy fence.
Okay.
Is it at the site plan portion that they confirm this right away? I don't remember seeing, I guess, they familiar with what's entailed with that second condition there?
Yeah, again, because site plan also deals with the design of the overall site. So those are conditions that will come out of that site plan review process.
Okay.
I just like to give them the heads up, forward it on.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Anything the applicant would like to add to this application?
Good afternoon, Rob Moulton, SCCM, on behalf of my client. We agree with everything Ms. Rush has had to say in regards to this property. I think it's an improvement upon the existing conditions of the house that's out there right now in regards to the business. We'll actually be pulling this, by building this development, this unit, we'll actually be pulling the building further away from McKnight, so actually creating, like she said, a better sense of streetscape of the existing properties on McKnight on that side. So we're also incorporating as part of this a type D buffer along those two property lines of the adjacent residential side over there. So as part of Ms. Rush's comments in regards to the fence, we don't know at this point in time until we get to the site plan level whether or not we'll be tearing down the fence or replacing the fence at this point in time, but we will be installing a type D buffer along those two perimeters of the property on that side. So.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come forward and state your name and address, and you can give us any comments you may have. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or a motion. And we have 3 sections of this application.
I have one question. In the first screen that we had up there, I think you were saying that they would extend the sidewalk as long as there's right-of-way available. But there's no sidewalk on that street, so we're almost extending it to the roadway. So why would we ask them to do that?
You're talking about on West McKnight, right?
I'm talking about, is this not a sidewalk? What is this?
It looks like it might be at the corner. It looks like there's sidewalk along the corner of
Along Maple.
McKnight.
There is?
It does appear there's sidewalk along Maple Street, and then it stops basically just around the corner, and I guess they'd be asked to extend it the length of their property where it would stop, and then at some point with redevelopment or additional work down McKnight, then the sidewalk could get extended.
Okay.
So you would extend it from Maple into McKnight?
From its existing terminus that's just barely around the corner of Maple onto that'd be the eastern property line of their property.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I thought, okay. Thank you.
And this is assuming there's adequate right-of-way for that.
Correct.
There's space for it.
No further questions. I'll make a motion to approve the 19-foot variance with the recommended conditions set by the staff.
Second.
Have a motion and a second for the 19-foot variance. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that portion has been approved. Next, the 13-foot front yard setback.
I'll make a motion that we approve the feet setback from North Maple, subject to all staff comments.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. Next, the 10-foot side yard setback.
I make a motion to approve the 10-foot with the recommended conditions set by the staff.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that portion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none, so that application has been approved. Next, we'll move to application Z18003 by Roger and Kimberly Hopkins, requesting 2 variances from the zoning ordinance to construct a new residence located at 702 East Vine Street. This is an RS4 zoning district in the city core overlay. This application has 2 components: a variance of 8 feet from the required 10-foot front setback along Hancock Street, and a 3-foot variance from the 5-foot side setback. Ms. Rush, if you'd review that for us.
Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Hopkins are wishing 2 variances from the City of Murfreesboro Zoning Ordinance Chart 2 to construct a new residence. The property is located at 702 East Vine Street and it's zoned RS4, which is single-family residential, 4,000 square foot lot size, and it's also in the City Core Overlay District. The property is only 2,250 square feet in size. It's one of our smaller lots in this particular neighborhood. It measures 25 feet wide by 90 feet in length. It has an existing 800 square foot building on it, which historically was constructed as a mercantile building, local grocery store, in 1927, and then decades later was then used as a residence. You may have recognized this from recently. In September 27th, 2017, the Board of Zoning Appeals granted the applicants 4 variances from the required setbacks in order to construct 2 building additions. One was a second-floor addition for a bedroom and a little study area, and the second addition was a sunroom to the back of the house. And those variances were relating to the side yard setback and the front yard setback along Hancock Street. The current request is due to the fact that as they went in to start the reconstruction of the mercantile building, they found that there had been significant fire damage. Historical fire had been in there, as well as the original construction was not done to what we would be considered a residential standard. So the floor joists, the ceiling joists are all completely inadequate. The applicants had requested the city building inspection to go out and take a look to confirm what their contractors are saying, just to make sure that that this was a big decision for them on what to do. And the building official as well as another inspector both went out to the site and confirmed that the damage is irreparable. There just isn't a way to fix it. So as a result, the applicant is now requesting to demolish this structure and to reconstruct or build a new structure in the similar architecture. So it's going to be the same building size, generally the same footprint. However, he is going to pull it out of the front setback along East Vine Street so that there is no variance asked for the East Vine Street, even though the building is very close to that property line. The variances that are requested are for, again, the side yard setback for that same footprint, which is 2.5 feet from the property line. 1.8 feet from the property line, I apologize. And then along the Hancock Street side, the building is 2.5 feet from that front property line. The applicant is here to answer any questions that the board may have, as well as I can answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff at this point?
I have one. Okay, so in September, we approved 4 variances for additions. Is that now moot because it's no longer an addition, it's actually new construction, or is that incorporated into this new request?
It sort of gets folded in because those variances don't need to go away. The intention is still to construct the sunroom and the second story, so those variances will stand. They do ride with the land.
Okay.
Any further questions for staff? Anything the applicant would like to add at this time? If you'd come forward.
No, Mr. Chairman, I think Ms. Rush described the project very, very well and the status of things, and we're going to build the same building that we showed here a couple of months ago. So rather than a renovation, it's going to be a reproduction of that old general store from back in the 20s.
Any questions for Mr. Hopkins? Thank you, sir. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application? If you'd come forward. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and open the floor for further discussion or a motion. Again, we have two components to this application as well.
If no discussion, I'll make a motion. We approve the 8-foot variance along Hancock Street.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none, so that portion has been approved. Next to the side setback.
I move to approve the 3 feet setback on the opposite side of the building for the 5-foot side setback.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion there? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That application has been approved. Thank you. Next, we'll move to a special use permit request. Application Z18004 by Bobby Kirby Investment Partners, requesting a special use permit for a self-storage storage facility. This is for a 3-story building, 93,000 square feet. The property is zoned mixed use, and it's located on the north side of Medical Center Parkway between Robert Rose Drive and Thompson Lane. Ms. Rush, if you'd review that for us.
Yes, thank you. This property, as indicated, is located on the north side of Medical Center Parkway. It is part of a larger master planned development that is proposed through the Planning Commission through the process. I included on the screen a vicinity map that can show where generally the proposed mini storage structure would be constructed. So it's in a smaller area of that particular parcel. The applicant does wish to construct a 3-story self-storage facility on this property. It would be approximately 93,000 square feet in size and would contain 1,000 storage units. The actual project area is 1.95 acres, and it is zoned in the mixed-use GDO zoning district. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. The site plan shows that there would be parking on the property. It would be a total of 20 spaces located on site. The minimum required is 19, so it does satisfy the parking requirements. The setbacks for this particular zoning district is 15 on the front, 10 feet on the side, and 20 in the rear. And the building does comply with these setbacks and does not need any variances. There would be landscaping on the property, and the design of the building was also provided in your packets, which are shown on the screen. So it is a high-level design for a self-storage building. So based upon the proposal, it does comply with the required standards for a special use permit. Does not impede glare, will not generate any unusual amount of traffic that cannot be accommodated with this use, that the use and the operation would fit in this particular neighborhood. The applicant is SEC, and they are here in the audience today to answer any questions that the board may have, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for staff at this point?
Yes, sir. Did we approve a similar plan across the road of Medical Center Parkway recently?
Yes, in December of 2017, there was a self-storage facility, similar design actually, also the same story, 3 stories, and approximately the same size.
Are we going to reach some kind of saturation level where we're where this area is storage city? Is there any concern for that? Should there be any concern for that?
That's a good question.
I think that's a market-driven question, and it's not one of the conditions and not one of the qualifications that this board is to look at in terms of a special use permit. And I think when we read through the general requirements for a special use permit and those for a self-storage, in my opinion, they meet those. And if one of these doesn't make it, then some developers are going to have to repurpose his building if they both go up and they don't both make it. But I think that's a market concern.
So from this body, there's really nothing that would be within our capacity to accept it or deny it, right? Or deny it.
I don't believe that there is, no.
Well, the board does have the purview to review the standards that are in our zoning ordinance for special use permits, so absolutely. Does it impede light? Does it generate additional traffic that cannot be accommodated by the transportation systems? Those are things that are definitely within the purview that do need to be looked at with a special use permit. And because of the zoning district it's in, that's why it does require a special use permit, and it's not granted by right. There are new residences in the area. How many need storage?
True.
Unknown. It's market.
Tim, I asked a similar question at planning, just from a curiosity standpoint. I thought these were two huge facilities, but I was given the same answer that it's definitely market-driven, and I'm not sure the individual investors would be doing it if they didn't feel like it would be successful. So.
There's a lot of people moving into Murfreesboro, and with all the apartments going up and everything, they probably need it. Yeah. Storage.
They're awfully nice looking.
They're beautiful buildings. 93,000 square foot.
I mean, I've only been on this board a very short while, and I'm seeing, how many more of these we can put up. But thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.
Any other questions for staff? Anything the applicant would like to add? Any questions for the applicants? Board members? All right, at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you'd come forward, give us your name and address and any comments you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Lyles. My address is 2421 Old Nashville Highway. However, the property in question is next to a piece of property that I own at 1411 Van Cleve Lane. And in fact, my property at 1411 Van Cleve Lane is the only residential property adjacent to this tract of land. And during the time that Mr. Kirby has owned this piece of property, he's not been a good neighbor. I've had to repeatedly ask him to clean his property. I've had to ask him to remove an old house that became derelict and rat infested. He didn't put silt fences up. There's no barrier to keep trash from blowing. No seed and straw was applied to places where the topsoil was removed. In fact, the property is unsightly today. If you go out there, you'll see trash piled up, an air conditioning unit laying in the middle of the property. Debris from the old house is still there, ductwork scattered about. It's just not a place that a residence needs to be adjacent to. And I've repeatedly asked for this to be corrected, and it's not been corrected. Now, what worries me more than anything is that by establishing a variance or this special use permit, we'll be setting a precedent. There's no planned berm, there's no planned separation, no planned transitional area between his property, the commercial property, and my residential property. Now, I have great neighbors there. They are contributing to the community. They're paying taxes. I pay property taxes on that piece of property. I think that we deserve some consideration. And I would hope that you would vote this down, at least have the opportunity for some input into future development that's going to go there, some transitional areas, some berms, some separation, so that we can continue to have a substantial and viable residential area even in this property. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Anyone else present wishing to speak to this application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or motion.
Well, what about what Mr. Wiles just brought up? What about the fact that this property being, given it's transitional, given there's a lot of commercial activity already and will continue along that corridor, but given what he's brought up as far as where it borders, what kind of standards should a property owner have to meet in that situation?
Well, it is, as I indicated earlier in the presentation, it is part of a master plan. This whole property is going to be developed with various uses, and commercial is going to be one of them. So he was asking for a transitional area. He did have an opportunity to come up and meet with myself and the project planner of the master plan and was able to see what that plan looked like. So between this particular project that's on the agenda for today, there will be, and in the future, there is going to be another commercial building that will buffer between these two. So in terms of transitional, what we do are things like landscaping buffers, try to, provide certain setbacks, which this does meet. This use that's on there today is in compliance with all the setbacks. Those are the standards that the city can impose to make sure that there is a good transition between the two. In terms of the comments regarding the trash, debris, accumulation of things that shouldn't be there, I totally agree and concern with any of those concerns that are expressed, that those would be very difficult things to live next door to. They do relate to code enforcement, so we can pass his comments on to the code enforcement inspector to see if they can go out to the site and see if there's anything that they're violating. And if they're not violating, then there really isn't anything that we can do within our own standards. I wasn't clear whether or not that had already taken place, but I'm more than happy to pass it on after this hearing.
Okay.
Ms. Rush, so at what point does the landscaping go in, even though I realize that this building is not necessarily adjacent to the Mr. Lyles or any other property owners per se, but at what point is the buffer put in?
That's a good question. I don't know that answer. I would have to get back to you if you wish.
Maybe Mr. Mulchin can help us out.
Rob Mulchin, SEC, on behalf of the client. Regards to this property that we're talking about today, this is actually a piece of the overall puzzle of the Womack property. This is actually a middle piece. There's actually a pad in front of this along Medical Center Parkway. This is the next piece in as you come in the private roadway going into the development. Beyond this development and closer to the Van Cleve neighborhood is another parcel of the overall development itself. So as this is a master plan development, there's another parcel that's between this project we're talking about today in regards to the special use exemption for this piece of property on this side. There's another parcel to come yet between this property and the Van Cleve subdivision over there on that side. So at some point in time, that next piece of the puzzle comes online, there'll be a landscape incorporation. Part of that site plan process will come through with that process, whoever the developer is that comes along and buys up that property for that use. Then they'll come back with a landscape plan that'll be part of the site plan package that will incorporate whatever specifics in regards to landscaping, buffering, berming, that kind of stuff that would be placed upon that property that will be then installed when that is then built and designed out at that point in time. So right now in regards to the storage facility, it's more internalized to the actual site with another piece of property behind it between the two. So there's actually a buffer of land between this development and the actual neighborhood itself. And then when the next piece comes on board, that's when the landscaping and buffering and stuff, and that will come through with that site plan in regards to making certain that whatever uses on the next property is adequately screened based on what the zoning ordinance calls for in regards to different differentiations between uses on the two properties on that side. That's when you'll see some kind of landscape treatment or screening or element like that come along.
So are you saying that the applicant is not the owner of that other property?
The applicant is the owner of that property, and at some point in time when, as with the storage facility here, he'll eventually parcelize this off the master plan and sell it off to whoever it is that's looking to buy that property. And at that point in time, whether it be our applicant or the actual owner of that property at that point in time will come forward with a site plan. That's when the site plan will kick in, and staff will sit down and evaluate what necessarily means in regards to buffers are required based on the differentiations either in zoning or use types that will require a landscape, whether it be a berm, buffer, fence, whatever it might be at that point in time.
So we have one piece of property showing on our overview here of the city's map, and it doesn't. What I'm hearing, and I may be confused, is that this large piece of property is going to be developed by several businesses, but it has not been subdivided. There is just a plan for it to be utilized by several businesses. And this business, despite you're calling it a different parcel, but it hasn't, the property that we're looking at is not the same portion of the property as what's being developed in your plans. Am I making sense?
Correct. It's actually one big part. It's actually one big lot, and then eventually, as each piece, the master plan that was approved by Planning Commission has, I think, 6 or 7 different lots overall on the entire property. Okay. 2 months ago, came forth with what we call the L-shaped building, which is the first piece of the property that was taken down by a separate developer to put in a retail/office type, restaurant type of component along Medical Center Parkway. That was the first piece. So there's a private roadway that goes through this, and then off of that we'll be subdividing off individual pieces of property off that private roadway. It'll be part of the overall Womack property. This is just another piece of that overall puzzle on that side of things.
And it's not on the back side of the property, which fronts RS-15.
Correct. This piece right now, and that's part of the overall mixed-use development that this is. It's all MU. This piece is actually middle of the run. So you have a piece of property along Medical Center, the storage facility, and then another piece of property that's adjacent to the Van Cleve area back there on that side. So at that point in time, like I said, when that piece comes along, site plans will kick in, staff and everyone will have their chance to look at it and evaluate urban environmental, determine whether or not there's a need for a buffer, or even planning will look at it from a zoning standpoint and use standpoint of what's the need, what's the type of buffer that's required to have between the eventual user of that last piece of land and the adjacent properties over in Van Cleve.
And what is the space, the distance between this storage facility and the RSV-15 line?
On that, I'd say it's probably a good, 400 or 500 feet, something on that side. It's a pretty good sizable process because you got right now. You also have the large TVA line. So as you can see on these plans, the northern corner of this property, there's the large TVA line that runs from the southeast to the northwest that cuts across the corner of this parcel that you want to carve off the overall plan on that side. So between that, you've got the TVA line with an open space that's part of that, and then you'll have the adjacent property on the other side that whatever that use is determined in the long run, there'll still be, a good 400 or 500 feet between this property line, if not more, in regards to that spacing between the storage facility and that. And part of, as part of this package you guys have as well is also the landscape plan prepared by myself in regards to the landscaping that's part of this package. It's all part of the GDO package. It meets all the requirements of the GDO on that standpoint. We were at Planning Commission last week actually, in regards to this project. It did move forward to the final design review phase. We'll be resubmitting those plans tomorrow in regards to that package going through, but it does have the landscape package that's part of this property on that, and it's fully up to GDO standards.
But that landscape plan is for properties that being developed in the future?
No, it's only for this property on this side. So, as I stated, the property, the vacant property to the north of the storage facility site that's between us and Van Cleve, that's another property that'll come along in its own right with a separate site plan, just like we did with the site plan for this storage facility. It'll come through, go through the same planning commission process, 2 readings because it is in GDO, so it'll go through initial design review and also final design review on that. So there'll be 2 chances of which staff to review and make certain that they've got everything they need in regards to making certain that there's adequate space and or buffering needs that's between the eventual user of the last tract to the north that's along the south side of Van Cleve.
Just so I understand, you or the applicant owner, although they own all that property, they don't feel any obligation to address the buffer of the residential property to the north, just because of the proximity of where this current project is going to be developed?
I think in regards to, I think the upkeep, and I talked to the client a minute ago in regards to the upkeep, in regards to the property, they're going to look into making certain, and again, codes can also make their evaluation in regards to whether or not we're being compliant with keeping up with maintenance of the site on that side. Regards to putting any buffering in currently in regards to this project, I mean, that's, it's an undeveloped piece of property at this point in time to go out and put in a buffer or something like that between the adjacent residential users now and this vacant piece of land, which we don't know how it's going to develop out in regards to that last track on the backside of this development. And two, putting in a buffer requires putting in irrigation. That is it's a bonded piece of utility from the standpoint of the city. We wouldn't have the infrastructure in place to irrigate that buffer at this point in time in regards to taking care of that landscape material.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to respond to the earlier question. Based on the vicinity map, it looks like it's between 250 feet and 300 feet between this particular proposed use and the adjacent residence. And then they would be landscaping, so that the landscaping that they could install now, with the irrigation, would be related to this particular use. So there would be some landscaping provided.
Would that be on the, I'm looking at along the border of this property or the property line to the residential, if that makes sense?
It's around the perimeter of the building, so it's...
I don't remember, I guess we're all trying to remember having a large commercial piece of property, even though it's got a master plan to it, boarding up to residential and not addressing that border somehow. Is staff okay with, we're saying it's coming, I understand there's some difficulties, not sure what's going there, but I don't remember very often not addressing a residential piece of property that's boarding something like this without some sort of screening. You guys are okay with this process? And
our assistant planning director, Mr. Matthew Blomley's here, and
to our rescue.
Like to rescue me on that question.
Good afternoon, board. Good to see everybody again.
You too.
With regards to this property, Mr. Molchan is right. There is a master plan that's been approved by the Planning Commission. It has about 5 or 6 buildings. Each of those buildings are going to be reviewed and approved separately. We already had one along Medical Center Parkway. And our expectation as staff is that the required landscaping and buffering that is in the vicinity of each building will be required to be installed with that particular building. So there would be a Type D buffer required between the MU zone, where this property is located, and the RS-15 zone to the north. And it would be our expectation the standard timing of the installation of the buffer would be when the development comes in that's to the north of this, that would be directly adjacent to Mr. Lyle's property, would be that the Type D buffer would be installed at that time. Now the BZA has within its authority the ability to require that buffer to be installed sooner, but as Mr. Molchan mentioned, there would be some logistical issues, perhaps with the installation of an irrigation system, and certainly if it would be futile to try to install a buffer and for that landscaping material to survive, if it would be difficult to get water to those plant materials, that's maybe one thing to take into consideration. And also, we don't know exactly how it's going to develop to the north of it, what the use will be, what the size and shape of the building will be, the size and shape of the parking lot. And landscaping is typically one of the very last things to be done when a commercial site is being developed, just simply because all of the site work and utility work could affect its livability or its survivability through a construction project. So, but the board certainly does have within its purview the authority to require a buffer to go ahead and be installed. That would be at the board's discretion.
Well, there's been no mention maybe of a privacy fence, which does not require any kind of...
That's correct, and that also would be within your purview.
Just so I'm clear, is there any sort of buffer or screening between the rear of this property and the residential property, even though it may be 300 feet away?
There's the standard landscaping that would be required around this particular building, and that would include perimeter landscaping around the property lines that are adjacent to it, parking lot landscaping inside the parking lot, foundation plantings directly around the building. But as far as the actual landscape buffer, the screening behind this building or adjacent to the property line, no, not at this time. That would go in when the building to the north of it develops under our normal protocol.
And there's really not any. There's plans for developing the north part of this piece of property, but who knows when that may. I mean, they're under no time clock or time pressure to get that done. So we're kind of left with what's the landscape buffer. That's the typical plantings that may not add up to the D buffer. You're saying, or
right. It definitely would not add up to the type D buffer at this time. What they would be proposing, which would be just the standard non-buffer landscaping, if you will.
Well, we just approved another applicant in an area where they have a privacy fence, and the neighbors were that contacted the city, requested that a privacy fence remain or be there to protect them. You know, I guess I'm just not hearing that same equity with regard, even though, again, admittedly, Van Cleve and the other road to the north of that are in transition. That's apparent, but it still didn't address the current property owners that have a residential development there historically. You know, this is not addressing their issues and their concerns in the here and now. And as we said, we don't know when these other things could come about.
Right, and I think Mr. Ives could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that would be a reasonable condition to help mitigate the impact of the development on the adjacent neighbors to the north, if you so chose to do so.
I'm sorry, I must admit I was looking at the plans, trying to see some existing conditions, but I didn't hear what the proposal was.
Mr. Tips mentioned the possibility of, because it would not require much maintenance, the installation of a fence along the northern property line, several hundred feet to the north.
As a buffer between all this commercial development and the residential development to the north of it, the existing homes to the north.
Yeah, I don't know what to. Our overhead map shows that there is some kind of a tree line, but the extent of it and whether there's any kind of fence or not, I don't know. Mr. Lyles, I would.
Well, based on Mr. Lyles' comments, it would appear that there's not.
Doesn't sound like there is. No, requiring that a fence in connection with this project would appear to be a reasonable condition of approval.
We could also, defer to a month, and staff can go out and confirm the site conditions and report back to the board if that's your desire as well.
And there's not any planned fence that we know of. Basically, it's going to be, there would be access up to the building, maybe not drive up like I don't know if this is one of those where you, so there's no fence. A lot of times there is some sort of fence to park things. There's nothing like that planned?
Not that I know of, but we'll see.
There currently is a fence along that property line, but my client is willing to evaluate the standard of that fence and come back and install a privacy fence between Mr. Lyle's property and the property that we have in question in regards to the overall plan itself. So we're definitely open to, since landscaping is not an option in regards to logistically, I think my client feels comfortable that along Mr. Lyle's property, we can definitely go back in and install a 6-foot tall privacy fence along that boundary.
Mr. Lyles indicated that there was a portion of the common property line, there's already a fence there, a privacy fence. But it doesn't span the entire length of the property line.
So we'd be willing to fill in the rest of that gap on that side.
If I might speak.
If you give us your name.
My name is Bobby Kirby.
Okay.
I'm a partner of Investment Partners, which is the applicant and the property owner of all of the approximately 18 acres. But if it would make this body happy and Mr. Lyle happy, then we would consider doing a continuation of a privacy fence that currently exists. There is an existing small privacy fence along the rear perimeter, and I guess if we could extend that along Mr. Lyle's property line, we don't have a problem doing that.
Okay.
That may even be
Appreciate
something
the
more
offer.
more of a temporary nature until all of the property is developed out and we can do a more permanent screen out of landscaping.
Okay.
But we'd be more than happy to consider that.
Bobby, can you kind of help us? It doesn't sound like other than codes, if you're violating codes with respects to the trash, but y'all have done exemplary developments all throughout Murfreesboro. I just hope that we could be good neighbors here and get it cleaned up. You know,
We're violating a code. We would like to be made aware of that.
Well, no,
We'll go check.
I don't know that.
We'll certainly do whatever.
I don't know that
we
we're
can.
violating a code. I'm just a matter of trying to clean up the site some. So
We do have an existing retail building under construction there, but we'll certainly go by there today.
Okay.
To make sure the site is tidy and clean, and we constantly try to maintain that. So we'll be more than happy to continue.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby.
And one thing I would say, with this being in the Gateway Design Overlay District, the design of the fence would, and what type of materials are used, would be something that Mr. Halliburton and the Planning Commission will have purview over. I'm sure Ms. Green will make sure that it's up to snuff before it gets to y'all.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Okay, we're done with the
So
public
would
hearing,
we
right?
make this a condition about the privacy fence, or before we could
Do
approve
we know
this
enough about the length of the privacy fence, or does it need to be?
You can do that. You have the authority to make that a condition.
Make it a condition.
Okay.
Would it be more appropriate to table this motion to the next meeting to give staff time, or does everyone feel comfortable with all the comments that have been made about the cooperation between the parties? I mean, it still sounds like you may have to get a privacy fence that meets certain restrictions in the.
Well, I think those requirements would come back first to staff and then perhaps to the Planning Commission for approval, since it's in the gateway.
Okay.
But I think if this body requires a privacy fence, then the details of that, or say a continuation of the privacy fence, then the details of that would be a combination of staff and Planning Commission, would not necessarily come back to this body. So I think,
Okay.
I don't see a need to defer it, but
Okay.
probably within your power also.
So it's conditioning a fence, and then they can determine how, is it that full length of the residential, or is it just this portion, Mr. This.
I think the point would be to create a privacy barrier between Mr. Lyle's property and this development property, and I think you could leave details to staff and planning.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
There was just discussion if the standard of the fence may change if it's constructed on our property being in the MU zone, as opposed if we construct the fence on Mr. Lyle's property. And he said he would be fine with that if that's better to do and it might make more sense. And we're okay with that if that will allow to do a different style. I don't know if the standards are going to change if we do a privacy fence on a commercial property. But if that helps matters, and if we can work this out between staff and Mr. Lyle, we will put up a privacy fence and put it on his property if that makes more sense.
That sounds like a reasonable accommodation to me. Are we?
Well, and I believe, again, we could, this body would require some establishment of a privacy fence, and I think the details could be worked out, again, amongst the parties, staff, and Planning Commission if necessary. And if they can work out something that's acceptable between the parties that doesn't end up having to go to the Planning Commission, I think everybody will be perfectly happy with that. And if it requires Planning Commission approval of the type of fence, then so be it. But if they can work something out that doesn't require that, then I think we would all, this body and Planning Commission both, then should be happy with that.
If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion that we approve, subject to staff comments, including the privacy fence between this entire parcel and Mr. Lyles' property, whether that be on his fence being on his property or being on the applicant's property. And when I say entire parcel, I don't mean the entire I'm talking about the parcel adjacent to Mr. Lyle's property.
That being, just as a question, I'll second your motion.
Okay.
And I have a question. Assuming that's the only residential property that's impacted by this, right? I mean, it appears.
I can't answer that.
There's some
That's a
other
good
RS-15 along that. I'm not exactly sure.
I'm just, like I said, I knew it was in transition, and I didn't know, but I still second your motion. I just had that question.
I'll second.
It appears to me that this is the only
Oh, you did?
property with a house on it, that those other RS-15 properties do not have houses on it, but I can't say that for certain because there's a tag over part of one of the properties.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We clear on there? Happy with the fence? All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? There are none. So that application has been approved. Appreciate everyone's assistance and cooperation churning through that one. Our next special use permit is application Z18005 by Samantha Peterson, who is requesting a special use permit to allow a home-based business of a makeup application. This is for property located in a single-family residential RS-12 zoning district at 2607 Ritz Lane. Ms. Rush, for you to review that for us.
Yes, the applicant, Ms. Peterson, wishes to conduct a home-based business in her residence to do makeup application. In her email she had submitted to staff, she describes the business. She does makeup applications now, and she would anticipate approximately 3 to 4 customers per business day. Her days that she would be operating would be Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays between the hours of 10 to 5, and she would only have one client at the house at a time. She does do application for bridal parties, and those are events that are conducted off-site where the actual wedding has taken place, so those would not be at her residence. There would be no employees for this particular business, and this is in a fairly new subdivision. The house is newly constructed, so I don't have an aerial view of it, but it does appear that she would have adequate size for this business in her garage to construct a studio. The applicant is present today. If you have any questions of her or myself, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Ms. Peterson, anything you'd like to add to the application? All right, then next we'll move to the public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you'd come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or motion.
If no questions, I'll make a motion to approve with the recommended conditions set by the staff.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Next item, staff reports and other business.
I have none to report.
And I have nothing.
All right, we will stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.